Today, my guest on the Mishmash Podcast is my friend Mike English, otherwise known as Crossing Guard Mike, a local legend around town.
Or a legend in his own mind.
That's right. Well, who knows? After this, I'm pretty sure Roxanne's going to say your head's not going to fit through the door. So
She already does.
Well, and didn't somebody knit you a hat recently?
Yes,
so
Miss Sarah.
You're going to need a bigger one, I think, after this. So a little background information here. So Mike and I met, I don't think it was last year. I think it was the last
3 years ago.
3 years ago, right? Yeah. For the Cove Road. Mike was stationed at Cove Road Elementary, which at the time was where my oldest son, Tim, was attending. And we just sort of hit it off, I guess, with the morning walk. To my surprise, my 11-year-old son wanted me to walk with him. And, it was a good bonding time. I had no qualms about it, but I noticed that if I got there a little early, Mike was friendly. Yeah. We started to chat, and we had two topics that came up almost exclusively.
Right. Well, first, I thought it was so cool that you could see the affection between you and Tim, because, he'd hug you most mornings, upon leaving. And I just think that is like so fantastic that you have that nice of a relationship with your, it's awesome.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's the thing. When he hit those tween years, I was already bracing myself for that, what I viewed as the inevitable push off. It's the firstborn son and father and all that.
No, it's what happens in most, families, sure.
Right. And especially too, that year, so that first year, as a matter of fact, was that quasi-COVID year. It was when the kids were in school, kind of halftime with all the plexiglass and whatnot. It was, but you know what? They were out of the house and we didn't have to do all the virtual stuff. So I wasn't complaining. But I did expect by sixth grade, which was when we really started I made it a point in sixth grade to get there earlier both times, right, just to squeeze in some extra conversation time.
Right. I stopped being the crossing guard. I just started hanging out.
That was it. Listen, you've always been, for anyone listening that, may have an interest in it, Mike has always been diligent at his post. Thank you. And I think that's why so many of the parents respect you and appreciate the effort. Even the kids. Remember what they call you, Mike Green or
Green Mike?
Green Mike. There
Green
it was.
Mike, because they asked me what my favorite color was.
Yeah, and to be fair, it was a good group of kids too. That specific year.
Well, again, I wouldn't have taken a bunch of kids over to Romeo's for pizza if it wasn't for the fact that I thought they were really pretty neat. So
right, and that's perfectly indicative of the guy you are.
Yeah,
and so. Yeah, so with Tim, it started being less about him. There were some days I think the poor kid was standing there like, oh my God.
Waiting, come on, Dad, it's time to go home.
I tried to be cognizant of it because I remember as a kid, the average time for a single trip to the grocery store borderlined on 3 hours because, we had the one car, which my dad had at work. So my mom and I had to walk to the grocery store, the supermarket rather. And she met and knew everybody on the way there, while she was there, on the way back. And so I've, unfortunately, for Heather and the kids, haven't inherited that mayor gene, right. Which I think we both share, you and I. But yeah. And so I wanted to take our 3-year-long music conversation onto the podcast because I enjoy speaking with people about different things. And there's no one who knows more about music and who is as passionate about it as you. And I felt like this would be not necessarily entertaining, if anything, informative for people who are interested in it. So
I don't know about more knowledgeable about music. No, I know what I like. And I'm not afraid to tell people who it is that, the bands that really do it for me. And had I think a pretty interesting musical history because I like so much music. I mean, and there isn't a genre that I haven't at least listened to. When it first came upon us, the rap era, I was like, oh my God, what is this crap? But the more I listened, and the more I listened to what people were saying about it, it was just a natural evolution of music. I'm not a big fan of it, but I do listen to rap as well. It tells a good story.
And I love, and that's the thing too, right? With music, I feel like too many people are too closed off. They're closed-minded. They are intentionally, well, maybe unintentionally, but they're self-limiting is the way I would put it.
Okay.
I've heard so many people say, oh, I hate country. That seems to be the big one. Oh, I hate country. It's all pickup trucks and this. And that's a broad stroke to paint with because there's so many subsets. And, all. I mean,
Two types of music I don't like: country and western.
Country and western, right? Yeah,
That's what I hear.
right. And I mean, listen, you've got the outlaw era, right? So you have Willie and Johnny and all those guys, Waylon. But then there's more. I feel like country specifically has evolved the most because now there's all this pop country and rap-ish sort of stuff. But then still, for me, I've learned, and I'm biased in this regard because I play music too. I mean, when you got here, I was sitting at the piano. So it helps, steady the mind and gives the hand something to do. Yeah. But for me, that's also why I'm such a voracious, not just consumer of music, but explorer of it. Because you mentioned rap, right? Rap is a great example. I think that people listen to music and they listen for the instrumentation. They listen for whatever that they listen to, if they listen to pop or rock or whatever. But rap is something different. It's more of a groove, a vibe, a flow, a rhythm.
It's a beat.
Yeah, the beat. And I always hear people say like, "Oh, I listen to a lot of music," and in your case, it's vetted. Not calling that into question, but for me, I've really branched out. I mean, recently I've added Mongolian throat singing. I've added Indian hardcore metal. I mean, it's and the reason why is, and this is funny. My kids they used to like heavy metal and like really heavy stuff when they were littler. And I always found that fascinating. Heather said it was because like one time I had on, I think it was Megadeth or something. And I took a video because Tim he was so fussy. I put it on, he passes out right away. And I was like, wow, look at that.
Megadeth.
Yeah. I said, the power of music.
Yeah, that's odd.
Well, no. So Heather goes, well, yeah, because it's all just a bunch of noise, like white noise. And I said, oh, maybe, there could be something there.
I might agree with Heather on that one. Megadeth, wow. Well,
for your son, Will, he's more of a progressive rock guy, right? Like Dream Theater and...
No, he's rather well versed in music as well. He had to be growing up with us,
right?
But no, he likes heavy metal as well. I mean, again, he'll listen to Megadeth. He turns me on some bands, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And yeah, no, he listens to a lot. Mike Portnoy, the drummer, one of he listens to all his many bands.
And I was just going to say he's all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. That covers a lot of different. I mean, they have their Beatles band, they have their metal band, they have their,
So with regards to heavy metal, we'll touch on the origins there a bit in a minute, because I feel like if it's not your favorite band, one of our shared favorite bands at minimum could be considered sort of the forerunners of that genre. But I guess the two things I wanted to say about the music portion of it is, with the kids, they crack me up because they used to listen to Slipknot, all this stuff that's just that to the uninitiated sounds just like a bunch of barking, screaming noise and whatnot. Right. And that Indian metal band that I referenced before, I found them out last year. They're called Bloodywood, and they sing in English, in Punjabi, and I think Hindi or something like that. And obviously I don't understand, what they're saying. And that was the complaint of the kids. I thought they would listen to the music and feel the energy, and they were like, well, we couldn't understand what they're saying. I'm like, well, you can't understand what's, Corey Taylor's barking in Slipknot or whatever. I'm like, so what difference does it make what language it is if you can't understand it anyway? Okay. But you just made me think of something interesting. So my last guest is from the field of nutrition. And one of the things that we spoke about in our episodes was the struggles with introducing kids to new foods, right? And too many people say, oh, they won't eat broccoli, carrots, this or that. Mm-hmm. And I'm blanking again. Well, right. I'm blanking again on the number. I feel like it was like 13 times or 11 times. She's going to kill me. But it was like whatever number it was. You need to expose kids to the same foods, either in different environments or just repeatedly, before they can really form an opinion. And I feel like the same applies to music, like especially, again, using something like country, right? Where people write it off as whatever it is, and they listen to, 2 or 3 songs and that's it. But again, I've found that when you listen to something, there's probably something that you like and something that you don't like. And then the more you expose yourself to other variations and differences, you kind of build a network in your brain, I guess, that helps you figure out.
Makes perfect sense.
And I never force this on anyone. I don't, I'm a big beer guy or whatever. People ask me all the time, well, what's the best beer out there? And I heard this answer, and this is the only answer I give now. It's whatever one you like best. If it's Coors Light,
it's
Natty
the best answer because, again, there are so many different varieties, and that is something that's grown exponentially, like all the craft beers and. Yeah, you and Will would really have a good time discussing that sometime because he's into the beer thing.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. I'm glad I brought it up then. No, like my uncle Tony's a good example. He doesn't like, I think it's IPAs. He finds them to be too bitter. And there's two ways to approach that. My approach is then don't drink IPAs.
Right,
like
don't drink them. Sure.
I'm not going to force it. But there are some people who hear that and go, oh, no, listen, you got to try this, right? And they go, all that does is force that person even further into that position. And with music, it's kind of the same thing. People don't want to be told that they're wrong, right? I mean, your opinion is your opinion. But my attitude when it comes to music is the more exposure you get, especially to things that you don't like, the better it is. And as I said before, I was already at the piano when you were coming in. I write a lot of my own music. And that's also why I listen to so many different things, because I might hear a rap song that has a great sample and I can turn that into, or maybe just a rhythm, something.
The more you expose yourself to, the more it opens up to you. At least with music, I agree. I mean, I believe that we're talking about different types of music. When I was growing up, there was rock and roll, and that was it. It was rock and roll. I mean, of course, there's country and there's always the orchestral music, but we didn't have heavy metal and speed metal and all the others. It was just rock and roll music, and it's whether you were into it or not. I find it rather interesting how it's become so differentiated, if you will. That no, that's prog rock and that's heavy metal, and I always just thought it was music. I mean, and whether you like it or not, that's up to you.
Well, that's how I look at it. And it's funny, there's been a little bit of a pushback within the metal community, at least, for all of these ridiculous sub genres.
Please, yeah. You got death metal now.
Right.
What's death metal?
Or Norwegian death metal versus Swedish death metal. And to me, that comes down to the psychology behind music, which is a whole separate topic, right? Where
might be another whole show.
Yeah, absolutely. So people want to feel, and this is, I mean, again, I promised my wife I wouldn't get on the soapbox in these episodes, so I won't. Again, just one foot on here. People don't have enough meaningful things in their lives, right? They don't do enough things of value. And so they try to cull together, I don't know, either whether it's ego or just some sense of like purpose through these little seemingly meaningless things. And what I mean is, by being a fan of this really obscure sub genre, now you feel special, right? You feel different. Okay. You found cool. And I think that's really where it comes. And I notice it more in the online community on like ultimateguitar.com. So I've been a member of that site since 2004. I've posted enough, tablatures to whatever. But you see, in articles and the comments and stuff, you can see the folks who are genuine music fans by the way they speak. And then you can see ones who are maybe a little more insecure because they're putting down other bands. And, that's been there, I would imagine, since the advent of music.
Oh, absolutely.
The idea that there's this indie band, right? I mean, how many times has that happened? I'm sure it probably happened with Metallica too, where they're, they're ours, this little community, this whatever, and then they blow up and now they belong to everyone. But that's what frustrates me where those people are concerned is music is meant to belong to everyone, in my opinion.
Oh, no, I agree. And I think there's an even more interesting pushback, I guess. Once Metallica got so big, then you had a lot of the people that were originally fans. They're like, oh no, well now they just sold out. Well, that was their whole idea from the get-go, is you want, you're in it. Of course, because I think in order to, survive in the business, well, one, you have to love playing music, but two, yeah, you're trying to make a living.
Well, that's just it. It's a job, right? Unless you're living this like bohemian lifestyle, and because even buskers are playing for money. But yeah, I mean, you can't do it. And to me, this has always been a point of contention for me, especially where Metallica is concerned. I have other bands who have changed their sound over the years, and part of it, I would say, is just longevity. I mean, if you've put out 3, 4, 5 albums, you've been around, 10, 15, 20 years, there's an inevitability. You would hope that there would be a change in sound. My hope would be that it would be an evolution, a natural evolution. And where Metallica is concerned specifically, it made sense for the new direction that they went in. Okay. It sounded authentic. Now, if they had tried to put out a bubblegum pop record that felt forced and just sounded like it was cashing in, that's where you ascribe the sellout label. And there are other bands who have done that. There are bands who it's such a seismic shift in their sound, it doesn't make sense. And that to me is the difference. If it makes sense, then it's part of their evolution. But if it doesn't, then yeah, you can accuse them of selling out.
Absolutely. Now, my favorite band, Led Zeppelin, I always made that very clear. I really thought that you could see the evolution of the band throughout their course of history. With each album, they expanded their sounds, and like Led Zeppelin 3 was almost all acoustic, and people were like, whoa, what the hell? And as they went on, I mean, as they became more traveled, you saw the Eastern influence. Yeah, I mean, if they weren't growing, then they wouldn't have been the same band. I'm one of the people that, I've changed my mind on it, because originally I was very upset with Robert Plant that he wouldn't go back and play with Jimmy Page and, do the whole Led Zeppelin redux. But he followed his own muse, and that's what made him still remain the force that he is in music, because he's doing what he likes.
And all I'm saying is,
I don't have to like it.
Well, if you look at everything that he's done, right, especially solo stuff, everything past Led Zeppelin, if I'm not mistaken, that happened after he had some drinks with you at a bar. So I'm not giving you credit. I'm just throwing it out there. Coincidence? I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah.
So here goes the next half hour to 45 minutes, because Led Zeppelin was exactly the band that I thought was your favorite. For me, every story has to have a beginning, right? And so rock and rolls is fairly streamlined. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, right? It's maybe it's impossible to, but with heavy metal, the fact that it arose in the 70s, I feel like most people would argue that Black Sabbath was the first, like legitimately heavy metal band. But for me, I kind of feel like Zeppelin had more, maybe not heavy metal necessarily, but just metal to them. And it's not so much just about the music, right? Because Bonham was an absolute he was
monster on the drums.
I'm sure Animal from the Muppets, right? Yeah. That was based on him.
Without a doubt.
And so, and in my mind, there's a distinct difference between Led Zeppelin and a band like The Who, right? Keith Moon's another one who would
absolutely
destroy, literally and figuratively destroy it on the drum set. Yeah. But The Who's sound, for me, I don't sense any metal elements. It was different. And then there are other bands too that fall into that category.
I absolutely would agree. And oddly enough, there has always been a bit of animosity between The Who and Led Zeppelin.
Really? Oh, yeah. I wasn't aware of that.
Pete Townsend he thinks they're trash. He's said it on numerous occasions that he just felt like that Led Zeppelin ripped The Who off. I mean, and The Who, God bless them, they are one of the originals. They were together in like 1962. I mean, they've been around forever, almost as long as, they were there when, just after the Beatles, and they're kind of funny. It's just, Roger Daltrey, everyone thinks of him as just a singer, but he's actually, Roger Daltrey's, he's kind of a tough guy. Yeah.
And it's funny, one of my all-time favorite, my background with writing and being interested in horror stuff and everything, one of my all-time favorite Tales from the Crypt television show episodes, he was the star in it. Yeah. So that's actually my first connection to him. It's not through The Who, it's not through the music, it was through that. And so when I saw him, a throwback. So as far as The Who and all those other bands go, right? And this connects back to what we were saying earlier. I feel like you can't separate the psychology from the music. There's a reason that people are drawn to certain types of music. And for me, I really think it goes, I can't say that it started in the 50s, but my mindset is when rock and roll started to pick up, right? When radio and especially when television really started to take off, and we're dating ourselves here,
absolutely.
Yeah. Quick aside. I didn't get to tell you this. So this morning we're watching TV, and there's a commercial with Gabrielle Union, who's an actress, and then Dwayne Wade. Mm-hmm. And I just recently found out that she's 50. She does not look 50, and this isn't just in commercials and whatnot. I mean, even in regular photos,
she does not look 50.
Right. No. She just has a youthful glow.
Yes.
And I said to Tim, dude, I can't believe we're watching it together. I said, dude, I cannot believe that she's 50 years old. And then I said, and Dwayne Wade too looks, and granted, it's a commercial, right? So clearly, whatever.
Airbrush and all the other,
Right. And so I said to him, I was like, and even Dwayne Wade, he's older than me too. And Tim goes, and this is why he's now dropped to the bottom of the depth chart on the favorite child list. He goes, I mean, they look like they're in their 30s. And I felt it. I felt the disturbance in the force, and I knew what was coming. I said, okay. And he's like, and you look And then he stops. So I'm thinking, okay, I just turned 40. Maybe he thinks I'm sensitive about it. I'm like, Tim, it's okay. Say it. No. I don't want to hurt your feelings. Like, no, I'm a big boy. I can take it. I said, go ahead. If you won't say it, I'll say it. I was like, all right. Yes, they look like they're in their 30s and I look like I'm in my 40s. And then there was that awkward beat of silence. And I said, wait, you think I look like I'm in my 50s? And he turns beet red and goes, well, I didn't want to say it. So shout out to Tim for, and everybody wonders why I'm on this recent.
Really putting Dad in his place.
Yeah. All of a sudden, everyone's wondering why I'm on this recent nutrition and fitness kick. That's why I'm getting it at home from the kids.
From your teenager.
But in terms of, teenagers is where I wanted to go with this. So if you think back to the 50s, right? The type of music that was acceptable was a little bit different. It was almost
it was a lot different. Well, exactly. It was all right. Very milk toast.
One of my favorite words, by the way. Glad you dropped that in there. And so back then it was more about the singing voice, which is fine, and you had the crooners, whether it was Sinatra or any of the Rat Pack guys and whatnot. However, then there was this slow shift, and I don't know if it can be ascribed to Elvis, which you actually just lent me a phenomenal book, which was it about Sam Phillips?
Yes, Sam Phillips, and he is considered the grandfather, if you will, of rock and roll, because he discovered Elvis. No matter what anybody else tells you, he discovered him. Actually, more was the woman he worked with, but
credit where it's due. Yeah,
exactly. They just had him on a recording, and he went in to record something for his mom. Elvis was a mama's boy. Everybody knew that, and the rest is history. He worked with him and got him big, and then he had to sell his contract because he was so broke, and that's Elvis became Elvis once he got with Colonel Parker.
Right, and I feel like good.
Just to go back a bit with the age thing, and it's odd that you bring that up. You just turned 40. I had this conversation, oddly enough, with Miss Sarah, the one who knitted me the hat, because she had a birthday, and I said, they're all just numbers. The only one that ever bothered me, and now you have to remember, I'm going to be 67 soon, so the only birthday that ever bothered me was my 30th birthday, because I'm from that era where we said, you can't trust anyone over 30.
That's right.
And once I turned 30, I was so lost. I'm like, oh my God, I can't listen to myself anymore. I don't know what I'm talking about. So I kind of worried on that for a little bit, but I got over it.
I think it matters. Like you said, age is just a number, right? And it's more how you feel inside. And I think both of us have almost a childlike exuberance when it comes to life. And so I think that's something that drew me to you. And I never mentioned this. I was telling a friend recently, but towards the end of that 6th grade year with Tim, I realized I was like, you had become a part of my daily routine, but I felt like we had struck up a genuine friendship. And I think you mentioned too that you were going to be leaving that post. That's what it was. And I knew that because my daughter is now at Cove Road. Right. And initially I just said, we'll continue this.
But you did tell me she was taking the bus as well.
And that's right. I realized she was taking the bus, and I was like, I felt compelled to see if you'd be willing to take this to a different venue, right? And see if we could continue the friendship off there. And I'm not going to lie. I just told a friend about this recently. I was more nervous asking you to exchange phone numbers than I was asking my wife if she wanted to be my girlfriend.
The funny thing is I felt the same way because, again, the older you get, it seems the less friends you have, unfortunately. And it is, you get busy with life. Life's hard. And I had the same thought. And I'm like, damn, Matt's become part of my everyday existence here. And now we're not going to have this in common where we'll be passing by each other every day. So, and that's, thank God for, technology, because we've gone. Now, if this was 30 years ago, it would have just been telephone, but now you got text and email and all that. So it made it a bit easier. But I did want to continue the friendship, and here we are.
Yeah, no, and I was so appreciative of it, and that's the thing, right? One of
as was I.
One of the attitudes I take with life is I try not to let my fears or concerns or anxieties hold me back. If anything, if I am nervous about doing something, even just starting the podcast as an example, I take that as an indication that I should do it. You know, like we're not talking about like that nervousness you feel, you know, standing untethered on like a bridge or something.
Right. No.
But
yeah, you're not going to get hurt by doing this. You know, maybe your pride, but that's about it.
Right. And it's funny, in the house recently, my wife and I have been discussing friendships and things like that a lot lately. And one of the things that I noticed is, and I felt this with you, and I have a sense that it was the same kind of thing. I don't factor in age, background, race, none of that stuff. None of the qualifiers matter. I am an energy sort of aura guy, not in like a crazy new agey way, right? Maybe a better way to put it is I either click with people or I don't.
Oh, yeah. And as we said, age is a number, so it doesn't matter that, yeah, I'm old enough to be your father. But
well, not if I'm in my 50s.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
I'm very glad that we have seen this through, and it's cool. And as far as the kids thing, let's get that out there. I love children. Being around them makes me feel younger, and like it was such a great experience being at Cove Road. But that age that's a tough age. So I'm a lot happier being now with the kids at Lily, and they're younger. They listen better.
Oh, for sure. I love coaching, and I know we're going to get back to Led Zeppelin eventually. Yeah. I love coaching. I love coaching in general, but I lucked out. Like I knew professionally when I was teaching, I wanted to be with high school students. I felt like that was a very unsure time in my life, and I think now, with that experience, I wanted to be able to give back to other kids. I wanted to make sure that none of these kids feel at 17 or 18 the way I felt, you know? Right. And so, and then when it comes to coaching, it's the same kind of thing with the littlest ones. I want to make sure that these kids, basketball is arguably my biggest passion, right? I mean, you see, there's stuff, paraphernalia all over the house. Mm-hmm. And so I never want to force that passion on anyone, even my kids. They came to it naturally. It wasn't something, it was, if anything, by osmosis. Same thing with the music. I didn't force it on them, but they were definitely exposed to it. And so with coaching the youngest kids, my goal is to make sure, that they enjoy the sport. And for me, a successful season, and believe me, this rankled plenty of parents. I don't care if we lose every game. I don't care about any of that. My goal is a successful season for me at the end of it, especially with rec basketball, right, is when those kids want to come back and play another one. Not just for me, but they want to continue with the sport.
That's it.
And especially, and this is why I gravitate, because I've recently just coached. I've been sporadically, pitching in with my kids' AAU teams. And, obviously that's a completely different level and whatnot. And that,
no doubt,
that was a good experience for me, self-confidence wise, especially shout out to a former guest, Sarah Dessner. So Sarah is one of the best coaches that I've ever met. And she coaches girls teams primarily. I think she's had co-ed teams before. So she is a great leader of women, and that's the focus. And so the first time she asked me to fill in for her was like an unbelievably big moment for me, not pressure-wise, but just a sense of pride, right? Because there's an element of trust that comes into that. Of course. She wouldn't just hand the reins over to anyone. And so I've had a couple of opportunities thanks to her, and then with my son Jackson's team, and I actually just got to coach solo for the first time recently. Anyway, so going back to the difference with rec basketball is the pressure isn't there. Like these teams that we're on, we're traveling to Atlantic City, to Boston, to Lancaster to compete, to win.
And it is about winning then. Yes, of course. At that level, it has to be.
And so with rec basketball, it's, in my mind, even with the playoffs and stuff, it doesn't have to be.
It's supposed to be fun.
Right. And my goal every year was everybody can spot the kids who are not the most athletic, who maybe would benefit from even more remedial training and all this kind of stuff. And so those were the kids that I kind of took under my wing. I wanted to make sure every kid there got a chance to score. And this was the thing. Again, some parents that are hyper fixated on the winning part of it, it would drive them nuts, because with some of my teams, especially the older ones, we didn't have a point guard. And I didn't really get into it with a parent once, but I explained my mentality, because he was like, I think we'd be doing better if Tim brought the ball up every time. And maybe you don't want to do it because he's your son. I said, buddy, the reason I'm not doing it, and the reason we don't have a point guard, is because I have 10 kids on this team. 10 families worth of people.
And they all think they're point guards.
Well, no, not even that. You have 10 groups of people who were here to see essentially one child.
Right.
And they're not there. Sure, it would be great if Tim brings it up and takes it coast to coast and scores every time. But I'm more concerned about them being able to take their cameras out and get their moment with their child. And, you know, and that. But anyway, we've gone so far away from Led Zeppelin, we have to go back. So going back to the decades thing and Elvis, that was the jumping off point, right? So Elvis, in my mind, sparked a cultural revolution, because prior to that, neither of us were there, for what it's worth, pair of old men that we are. You know, you look back, especially going back to Prohibition, there's always been this, I don't know, puritanical approach to things. Puritanical propriety is the way I would put it, with American culture and stuff. It was very focused on just behaving a certain way, conducting yourself in a certain manner and whatnot. And you know, that works. It's great. There's something to be said for that. But people are, you always say it all the time, peoples are peoples.
Indeed.
And people have their
That's
own.
from The Muppets Take Manhattan, one of our favorite movies of all time.
One of the best movies of all time.
That I watched about maybe 6,000 times because of my kids.
Oh, no. Hey, listen, there's worse things to be watching 6,000 times.
But and another fact, Elvis, to those who are so much younger, he got in a lot of trouble just because he shook his hips. Can you imagine that today?
Well, right, exactly. And that was my point, right? He sexualized music.
Absolutely.
It was sensationalized. And again, that coincided perfectly with the advent of television, because I'm sure that if he was doing those things not on television, and wasn't there like a broadcast, a specific show or something that he went on?
Yes, it was on Ed Sullivan.
It was Sullivan, right, okay.
Ed
right.
Sullivan, yeah.
I wanted to say Carson, but I knew it was before that.
No, it was primetime TV. It was like 8 o'clock in the evening, and he had the audacity to be shaking his hips in front of, you know, a bunch of screaming women.
Right. And listen, I realize I'm painting with a broad brush here, right? I'm sort of whitewashing the discussion in terms of like the culture. I'm going with like the predominant.
But it did revolutionize music. As you said, it sexualized it. And yeah, it really opened it up. And as you can tell, as you know, what happened afterwards.
Right. And for me, there's a straight line from Elvis to Led Zeppelin. But more importantly, I've referenced a few times now the psychology of music, why people choose what they do. And I wonder if that was really the first time where there was a sense of rebellion in terms of the music that's being listened to. I'm sure it's not, but that's the most obvious one, right? And then with the Beatles.
That's the one that sticks out. And just a little aside on that as well. Led Zeppelin, you know, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page were both big fans of Elvis. Robert Plant has said it was one of like the highlights of his life that he got to meet him. You know, he thought it was so cool. But, you know, of course, that was old Elvis. And
well, yeah, not a banana, peanut butter, honey, or whatever, chocolate spread sandwich Elvis.
Exactly, yeah.
So to get to Led Zeppelin then, right? So there's a straight line from Elvis to the Beatles to these other bands, even the Beach Boys to an extent. They were more milquetoast, if you want to do, more innocuous, I think, less threatening for the culture, because the sound was different.
At the beginning, yes, but they actually had a very big rivalry with the Beatles.
Which I learned about from you. Yeah, I had no idea.
They were actually tossing ideas back and forth across the ocean there. I mean, because they were friendly competitors. How's that?
Right, but in terms of I'm thinking more of like the Shea Stadium concert for the Beatles, right? And like those women who were absolutely losing. I mean, they were having out of body experiences.
They were losing their drawers.
They were
throwing them on stage.
Right. I don't know that's ever happened at a Beach Boys concert, but maybe it has.
I think it may have. Okay. I don't know. I'm you know, again, I was rather young for the Beach Boys too, but
right.
You know.
and so we get finally to Led Zeppelin, right? So to me, Zeppelin is the quintessential rock band. Start to finish, they check every box for me. Now, the only caveat that I have there is that in recent years, I've learned more about sort of the sourcing of some of their either musical musical ideas.
Sounded like Robert Plant there. He used to put an R on a lot of that. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And whether it's the music or the lyrics, lyrically was the word.
They did steal a lot of their music. There's no question.
And
you know, from a lot of the old blues artists.
And it's completely inexcusable. This is not meant to be a defense of it, but recently, especially with Taurus with the song Spirit.
Oh, jeez, yes.
Right?
With the whole Stairway to Heaven. Yeah,
right.
please.
Now, I'm not saying this doesn't justify it, but at the time, this wasn't a Led Zeppelin exclusive behavior. It was happening everywhere.
No, absolutely.
And whatever you want to say about it, the white imperialist aspect and all that, yes, it was definitely, people were being taken advantage of musically, especially with the contracts. I mean, I've read some of that, like people signing rights away that they didn't understand what was in the contract and everything. But
they did that to a lot of artists.
Right. And that's whole...
And it wasn't even a race thing. It didn't matter who you were. Yeah, the businessmen, that side of it, they just, got these dummies to sign away their, all their rights. And they got rich and the musicians stayed poor.
Right. Which is kind of funny when you look at where we're at now with streaming and
And as far as the music goes, too, it's good correlation. Every good comedian knows a good joke when he steals it. So, and that's what they were doing. They were stealing their music. And everybody borrows from everybody else. That actually became really big when they got into the sampling. And when was that? The 90s or the 1000s?
Yeah, the early 90s. Yeah, late 80s, early 90s with it. And so I think the watershed moment, if you will, with that was the Run DMC and Aerosmith collaboration for Walk This Way.
God, yeah. Well,
and which was great.
It gave Aerosmith their career back.
Yeah, right. And the way I look at it is, and I've looked at it specifically with Zeppelin, is back in the day, every band worth their salt had a distinct sound. You could hear a chord and know that's Jimmy Page. Yeah. That's a Zeppelin song, right? And it wasn't just them. It was the Police. It was the Who, the Beatles.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. All
the
of them.
Rolling Stones, all of them, right? And so that's kind of my point where, the big debate recently with Ed Sheeran and the Marvin Gaye song is, can you copyright chord progressions? Can you copyright, not melodies, but just different aspects of the songs? And I don't think you can, because the individual aspect.
There are but 8 notes.
Right.
So at some point you are going to be copying somebody because there are only 8. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And, when you look at the most blatant, obvious example I can think of is Vanilla Ice with the song Under Pressure and his song Ice Ice Baby. He literally added, I believe it was an extra 16th note. That was it. He flat out completely took the bass line from the Queen song. Right. He didn't change it. He didn't make it his own. And that's kind of the point where Zeppelin is concerned, right? And again, it's a roundabout defense of their music. But I feel like the changes they made, whatever they did, they made it their own.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I think, now and again, in my opinion, where they changed the business the most was that they made it, and it's because of their manager, Peter Grant, they made it pro-musician. He demanded that they get certain percentages of the box at any show and for their records. He's the reason. Like they should be thanking his grandchildren for that. Peter Grant was who he was because he made them the stars that they became, or the wealthy people that they became. So, and
this might be a little controversial here. This take, right? Elvis could be argued as the best. I don't want to say frontman because it wasn't a band, right? But the best presence on stage from that decade and forward.
Not even a question.
I think some people might argue following him might be somebody like Mick Jagger, but for me, Mick Jagger, again, just in terms of his presence, it doesn't do it for me. For me, the second best, the single best rock frontman of all time is Robert Plant. He commanded that stage. Was it the Song That Remains the Same? Song Remains the Same, the concert from Madison Square Garden?
Yep.
If you watch that, he just oozes musical sexuality.
And it wasn't just that. Having seen them a number of times, it was almost as if he would have a running commentary with the crowd in between songs. I mean, he was, or he still is, a presence back in the 70s. He had that aura of sexuality and personality as well, which now it's more personality, but he is in his 70s. I agree with you in that. And again, I am biased. I freely admit it because they were the best band that ever was, in my opinion.
Wasn't Presence one of the later albums, or am I making that up? Okay.
Yeah, indeed, it was. Yeah,
that's what I thought. Well, and I want to speak specifically about the albums themselves, but the thing that always struck me about Zeppelin, and I never got to see them live in concert, but I've seen footage and whatnot, is that was the first group. And this is, remember we spoke about The Who earlier, and The Who and Led Zeppelin are the two bands where I really think of the performance, individual performances, not musical performances, just the stage presence and what these people look like on stage. So Townsend with the big windmill, swinging guitar strikes, and Daltrey with
the swinging the microphone.
Exactly.
And he came in a close second to me as far as, behind Robert Plant.
Oh, yeah. No,
Daltrey is just, he's amazing. I tip my cap to him as well.
Yeah, he has that same energy. It's just, again, to go back.
And he loves performing. He does.
Yeah, and you can see it. They have, listen, they have their rock songs, their rock anthems. They have the slower stuff. Behind Blue Eyes, I love. I think that's a great song. Eminence Front has such a great...
That is one of my favorite Who songs. I don't feel like it ever got the credit it deserved. It just had this awesome beat. And Eminence Front is... That's the bomb.
To butcher a quote, a paraphrase from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, the DJ says that Townsend doesn't always step up to the mic, but whenever he does, he's going to slay it. And that's what happened there with that song. It was just, it was incredible. But, and obviously they have their, I'd be curious. Okay. So I feel like there are certain apex songs for bands, right? So to use Queen as an example, Bohemian Rhapsody is their apex song. And then you can argue that there are certain albums that are the band's, the premiere. Like
without a doubt, yes.
Now for the Who, you've got Quadrophenia, Tommy, the rock opera, and all that. So, there's different ones that are famous. Yeah. I always felt, and this was just for me personally, that Led Zeppelin 4 was great. But when I've spoken to people like my brother, George, who is far more knowledgeable than I'll ever be with music, for him, he says the definitive Led Zeppelin album was Physical Graffiti.
Without a doubt.
See? And so I think, so I need... Well,
because they showcase so many different varieties of sound that they were capable of making, I think. And again, it was a double album, so that made it a bit easier. You had more songs. But yeah, they just showed that they could play so many, different types, I guess.
Was it Physical Graffiti 1 and 2 as a double album, or was it Physical Graffiti 1?
No, it was one out. It was released as a double album.
Okay. Is there a Physical Graffiti 2?
No.
Or am I making that?
No,
okay, so it's just...
Yeah, it's just Physical Graffiti.
Oh, I'm an idiot. It's so on my computer, I have a
right, you have
an extensive digital collection.
Second, yes.
Right, so it's CD 1 and CD 2 or record 1, record 2, either way. Yeah. So one of the things that I love about music in general is the feeling. Again, I told Heather my ovaries have swollen to thrice their size lately. That's what happens when you turn 40, folks. But I connect with people with music or whatever on these vibes and feelings. And then I love when there's extra levels to it. So there's a singer-songwriter named Jason Mraz who had a couple big songs on the radio, The Remedy and I'm Yours and all that. And those are great. But his best stuff, the stuff that I really love,
nobody's heard of.
No, and that the shame of it is, in my opinion, it's the best. But the metaphors, the wordplay, there's substance to it, and that's the foot's going back on the soapbox. Yeah. Nowadays, societally speaking, you look at TikTok, you look at a lot of these things. There's no substance, in my opinion, in terms of what's there. It's just these quick little hits, and it's the same thing with music. It's why I'm not a big pop music fan. It's overly simplistic, right? There's nothing to sink your teeth into. And I don't think you've ever heard the song. I may have sent it to you once, but my all-time favorite set of lyrics is from a band called Incubus and a song called 11 a.m. And the song goes through a day in the life of a person in the midst of a breakup. I don't remember if it's explicitly stated, right? But it starts off like 7 a.m., the garbage truck beeps as it backs up, and I start my day thinking about what I've thrown away. So I love the visual, all of that kind of stuff. And when you get to Led Zeppelin and their lyrics, there's so much stuff that they pull from, so many sources, right? They were, was it Plant who was the Tolkien fan, or?
Yes, Plant was definitely a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. Yes, without it. I mean, and a lot of it really was just nonsense, and he'll tell you that. But it's where he was at the time. So
we just went through this exercise recently.
Come on, what's a bustle in your hedgerow? I mean, really? You have to be English to understand that.
Well, right. So, but that's what I mean is when, now I can't think of the exact quote, but essentially it's whether you're a writer, right? And this is hands down why I don't look at reviews or anything, good or bad. once you put something out into the world, creatively speaking, it's no longer yours.
Right. Absolutely.
Whatever meaning you intended doesn't matter because everybody interprets it.
Absolutely.
And
it means something to everyone.
And in terms of the music, that's what I mean. Like, he can sit there and say it was nonsense, but if people connect to it, if they derive their own meaning from it,
of course.
And they were I actually planned to do an episode about this topic specifically, is songs that had very specific initial motivations or meanings for the person that wrote them that are drastically different from the general consensus. And so one of them was from a band called Stone Sour. The song's called Through Glass, and Corey Taylor wrote it about fame and I think the music industry specifically, but just kind of feeling like you're trapped on the inside of the TV, right?
Yeah.
Most people interpreted that really as a love song. It drives them nuts to this day that people have it as like a wedding song or whatever. But again, you can't control how people feel about it.
No, of course. And actually, a band that we haven't mentioned yet, and I know you wanted to get to them, Pink Floyd. Listen to some of the lyrics to their songs about the music industry. By the way, which one's pink? The executives don't know who they're talking to. But yeah, and there's going back to Robert Plant. Listen to the lyrics to 10 Years Gone if you want to talk about a guy who just kind of blew up his life. Lyrics, again, as you said, it just, once you put it out there, it's what it means to an individual. You don't know how they're going to take it. And going back even further now, talk about individual songs and albums. The Eagles, when they put out Hotel California, it ruined them because I think they realized they could never top that. And they did put out an album after that, but called The Long Run, and that's what they did. They went for a long run because they couldn't do something better. And I think that happens with a lot of bands where they'll get to their apex, as if you will, and that's it. Like, what's the point of doing anything else? We can't be better.
So I've recently been considering adding a video component to this podcast, and I'm so regretting that I didn't do it for this one because I wish everybody could have seen the look on my face when you mentioned the Eagles, because that's that mind meld that we have, because I was just thinking about them. The Eagles, it's so funny to me to see how loathed they are in some ways. Like, yes. and for me, I think I've told you this story probably several times, but Heather and I went in 2008 to see them at the Garden, and the smarminess that came out of Glenn. Now, Don Henley, I knew had an ego. That was, that goes with it. And
right. that his ego is like world famous. Yeah.
Again, whole separate episode on drummers who are the lead vocalists and the egos that go with that. That's a whole, because think about
Phil
it.
Collins.
That's exactly who I was. Yep. I was thinking Genesis, right? And the funny thing is with that too, like, I think of the drummers as the most unhinged ones, right?
In a lot of bands, yeah. Well, right. John Bonham.
Yeah, exactly.
Keith Moon.
And then you have the lead singers, the frontmen or frontwomen, who are arguably like the egos. And so then when you have the drummer being the singer, it's a recipe for chaos. But as far as the Eagles go, specifically, they're one of my favorite bands because of, again, that complexity, right? So for my generation, the boy band era was the big thing in music. Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, 98 Degrees, and then all the other ones, O-Town, BB Mac, Westlife. I mean, there was so many.
And I never got that.
Which was great. But what's funny is I liked NSYNC. I liked, the songs on the radio from 98 Degrees. But the Backstreet Boys was the group that I actually, I would just throw their stuff on amid, listening to all this other stuff. And the reason why was, now in retrospect, the complexity of the vocal harmonies. And that's really what I think attracted me to the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac, which I'll get to them in a second. It's just the musicality of it's there. And you look at some of the songs, again, sometimes meaning there's not a lot of wiggle room, right? So if you're standing on a corner, Winslow, Arizona, that's...
And it's such a fine sight to see.
Right.
Yeah.
It paints a certain picture, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you have something mystical happening with Hotel California. And I don't know if you ever looked into this at all, but apparently, do you know what colitas is? Because...
No, and I've always wondered the warm smell of colitas. I just assumed they were talking about pot at the time, but
I think that's the closest consensus, because the term had no real meaning to it, but I can't imagine that it was a throwaway word, especially with how particular, they are or they were. And so, the Eagles, again, Desperados, obviously, is arguably their most well-known song outside of Hotel California. Right. But it's funny how, and I am tying this back to Zeppelin too, not the album, the band. Yeah. You have Hotel California, which again is the peak and the apex. Now, personally, I still like a lot of the stuff that they released afterwards, individual songs or little pockets here and there. I even thought The Long Road Out of Eden was really good. Waiting in the Weeds, No More Cloudy Days. Oh, it's just some really, really great music. And watching, is it Glenn Fry or Frey? I always do that.
You know what? Either works, because I'm not sure how he pronounced. I think it's Glenn Frey, but
okay, yeah. So I'm going to go
again.
So with Glenn Frey, after he passed, they brought his son on, and he sang that. He sang a couple of different songs, but that one, that hit the feels again. Again, the
yes, no, the ovaries. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. So, but in terms of Fleetwood Mac, they were an interesting story in. I don't know. I'm sure real music fans know that there were really two Fleetwood Macs. There was the pre-Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks Fleetwood Mac, which
were more of a blues band. Like, come on, Steve Green was the original guitarist, I believe, and he was definitely he's really looked upon as one of your premier blues players. But yeah, they had some evolution. Well, the Eagles actually had quite an evolution because they were really just like country rock. And then with Hotel California, now they're just rock and roll. But all bands do that, I think, to a degree.
And I didn't realize until recently that Glenn and arguably like one of my all-time favorite guys, Bob Seger,
absolutely,
were roommates. I think like they were both from Detroit. They worked on songs together. I couldn't think of two people further apart on the social spectrum than Glenn Fry and Bob Seger.
Yeah.
Turn the Page is just
Bob Seger, so underrated as a musician. I felt because he had so many great songs. Oh my goodness!
Against the Wind is.
Yes.
You know what it is for me?
That's like an anthem.
It
really
we
is.
all
are running against the wind.
I'm sorry that we're bouncing all over the place here, but I also don't care. So sorry, not sorry. But
that's what music is about, though.
There are two groups or two. There's bands involved here, but I'm going to go just with the frontmen. Obviously, I was born in the 80s. I grew up in the late 80s and early 90s. So I missed the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Yeah. The peak Americana, if you will, right? So I experience it vicariously through the spirit of the music, which sounded weirdly like a Hallmark card starting there. But I look at Bob Seger and songs like Against the Wind, Night Moves. Okay, I'm taken back to these sweaty summer nights in as a teenager in the 50s or the 60s,
right, and the 70s, and I got to live them.
Right, and so you can confirm or deny it too. The other guy that hits those same chords, for me, is Tom Petty. Tom Petty's...
Oh, absolutely, yes. And again, someone that I don't think got his due when he was younger. He was much more appreciated as he grew older, but no, he was there right from the get-go, and he was doing it, but...
Listen, you could argue as to which album was the best for the Heartbreakers. A lot of people like Wildflowers. There's all different ones. Right. But his later stuff, and this is the funny thing too, he is a guy that never lost the juice. And I know you're not as familiar with these groups and stuff, but I know you know who Dave Grohl is.
Oh, absolutely.
And to me, he is the next guy up in that sense. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the recent Foo Fighters music specifically, but just in terms of the aura and the energy and stuff. And Petty, he had us a song, "It's Good to Be King," from later. I think it was from after they released their Greatest Hits album. I think of that album as sort of like the midway point, right? Because all of the best stuff arguably came before that, but there was still good stuff to come after. Sure. I'm pretty sure that was an after song.
With Dave Grohl, what I appreciate about him is he seems to have an appreciation of the music that came before him. And that shows you that he's, he knows what he's doing and he knows what he's talking about. And you can see that he is deeply involved. Going back again, here we go, with the bands and the harmonies. you really need to listen to a lot more Beach Boys, and even Beatles for that matter, because you want to talk about harmonies. But the Beach Boys, oh my goodness, yeah.
My all-time favorite Beatles song is Eleanor Rigby.
Yes,
and that initial segment with the vocal harmonies is great. The point, just to put an end cap on it, that I wanted to make with having a Hotel California level album and then following it with something less was fascinating to me with Fleetwood Mac. And we were talking about Fleetwood Mac and the fact that there is essentially two different bands, different sounds. Yeah. Let's jump off of that in a minute to get back to Pink Floyd, because there's the Syd Barrett era and then everyone else. What I found interesting is, and I love the fact, I know I've said this 1,000 times, and I'm sorry if anybody's listening and you're rolling your eyes. I get it. It's fine. But the fact that Sarah's favorite band, my daughter Sarah, is Fleetwood Mac is just the coolest thing to me, because that there's just something that I connect with that band too. And it works with her. So obviously their number one, all-time great album is Rumors. Right. And they were a mess. They've always been a mess, especially Stevie Nicks and especially Lindsey Buckingham. And what I find so fascinating, just from a musical history standpoint, is they were under immense pressure and a cloud of cocaine, which is neither here nor there, like a perpetual cloud of coke.
Without a doubt.
to follow up Rumors with another Rumors. And they intentionally self-sabotaged by recording Tusk. Right. They wanted to make the most dissonant, unradio friendly thing ever. And this tickles me to no end. The title track, Tusk. Are you aware of where the name comes from?
No.
So this is the not safe for work portion here. Apparently, you're familiar with the drummer, I assume.
Yes.
Mick Fleetwood.
Oh yeah, Mick Fleetwood. Who? Yeah. Was there at the beginning?
Would you say he's a large fella, big guy,
yes.
6'6", 6'7"?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, Tusk is the nickname for his penis.
Somehow that doesn't really surprise me.
But when you listen to the song, it just
stories that penis could tell.
It hits different. I can only imagine. And so, it was interesting because they were never really the same after that. And obviously they had great songs that came later, Little Lies and Sarah, biased on that one clearly. Right.
And maybe there's a correlation as to why your daughter likes that band, Sarah, and a lot of female-driven vocals. So
I think so. And it's tragically funny because my wife cannot stand Stevie Nicks' voice, and Sarah loves it and I love it. So, it's one of those like we agree to disagree things. But
I think I'm in Heather's court here.
Yeah. Hey, listen,
I'm not a big fan of Fleetwood Mac, but I mean, I can not like a band and still admire their work. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, you may not even admire it. It's even acknowledgement of it, right?
The fact that I know that they are good, or they're certainly, they found, like I'm not a big Bruce Springsteen fan, but I certainly know greatness when I see it.
Right.
You don't have a 50-year career and just be a bum.
Right. And whether it's, from a culinary perspective, I can respect that a chef makes phenomenal food. It just may not click with my palate. And
there you go.
There's a sonic palate too. Sorry.
Great analogy.
Yeah. Oh, right. So the funny thing was when I took her to see Fleetwood Mac, the bummer for me was that Lindsey Buckingham had just been ousted for however many times. But
for the 93rd time, yeah.
Selfishly, it wound up being the best thing for me personally because, and this speaks, listen, again, you want to talk egos. Lindsey Buckingham is on the Mount Rushmore with, Don Henley and some of these other guys. Yes. But the difference is he is arguably, for me at least, the best finger-picking guitarist of all time. You've got Chet Atkins, you've got a lot of these other guys, but the reason why, and I don't want to nerd out here for people, right? But in Rhiannon, which again comes back to the vocal harmonizing, the melodies and stuff, everybody knows that intro riff, right? The ba-ba-ba-ba, that thing. And almost everybody who plays it wrong. They play it with straight eights on the thumb, and it's actually a much more intricate picking pattern, and that's one of the simpler ones. And you talk about Big Love, like I'm still learning this song, and I've been trying for 6 or 7 years. And this guy's playing it, singing it, moving around. It's a whole different level. But losing him. Oh, and so this is what I was getting at in terms of the ego part. It literally took two men to fill his shoes on that stage. I think it was Neil Schon from Journey. He's from Journey. I'm trying to think of what his name was. It took the lead singer from Crowded House, whose name I'm blanking on, and Mike Campbell from the Heartbreakers. Right. And this wasn't long after Tom passed away. And so for me, it was a weirdly cathartic thing to see him on stage with Stevie, knowing that history, right? Because he said the Heartbreakers, Tom Petty said, the Heartbreakers are an all-boy band, but she's as close as a woman will ever get to being one of them. She was an honorary.
Yeah, she was definitely an honorary heartbreaker. Yeah.
And whether it's Stop Dragging My Heart Around or other, collaborations and whatnot. Yeah. But the emotions of seeing them on stage together and then performing, I forget which Petty songs they did, but they did, I think, 2 of them. It was just a really cool experience for me to have. And even if Sarah didn't appreciate it experientially on the same level, but it was just a cool thing to have. Yeah. Right. Neil Finn. There we go. I knew Neil Sean wasn't right. He was from the guitarist. Yeah. So Neil Finn from the band Crowded House was the one who filled in vocally. And so my all-time, again, not to get distracted here. Again, we're having these senior moments, or at least I am.
And I'm the senior.
Of getting distracted. So I, again, connect music to different things and whatnot, right? So we talked earlier briefly about Bob Seger. And so the song Turn the Page I mentioned specifically because I must have listened to that song 1,000 times between 2007 and 2010. And the reason why was when I write, I need to have music. Typically, I try to avoid songs with lyrics because that can be distracting. But what I was trying to paint, I was writing the follow-up to The Lion in the Desert. And in The Walking Ghosts, it's a post-apocalyptic book that has a lot of ground to cover. It's essentially a cross-country road trip.
Right.
In the worst of circumstances. And for some reason, I just connected with Turn the Page. And it was, when I hear it, it's just this sense of despondency of being tired, of being beaten down. And I know for him, obviously the meaning is more culturally significant because of, just that
what was going on in the country at the time. Course. Sure.
But for me, it just painted a sonic picture. And I don't think I have synesthesia, if you've ever heard of that. But synesthesia... I
have heard of it, but I can't recall.
So synesthesia is essentially the manifestation of smells and sights and things like that when you hear music. So it's kind of like a crossover of senses. You hear something and then you taste or smell something. I've always had this since I was a kid with colors for some reason. There's certain songs that just appear in my head as colors or other things like that. And so for Turn the Page, it just had that like dark sort of vibe to it, which was great. And it worked for me. But to go back to Pink Floyd, which is another of my all-time favorite bands. I know Tim's got a Dark Side of the Moon shirt. That album turns 50 or turned 50. I don't remember when it was released, but it
is 50. I know that. I think it might have been earlier this year.
That's right. But, so it's at some point. And you, again, same thing, right? You can argue that The Wall is a better album, and you have people who don't think anything post Syd Barrett was, up to snuff. But for me, that's my go-to all-time favorite.
Having been a fan both before and after, I think they got better. I mean, Syd Barrett was, until he lost his mind, he was a genius. And I happened to be fortunate to go see the Wall tour, which they only did 6 shows in New York and 6 in L.A.
And just to confirm for listeners, that's The Wall, the album from Pink Floyd, and not the Berlin Wall.
Yeah. No, I missed that. But, The Wall, I was never a really over-the-top fan of that album. So Dark Side of the Moon and Animals, they were by far better albums to me. But they were an interesting band to go see.
And again, those are albums that you could argue are far better. But again, I guess maybe what I was getting at was the vibe, the collection, the connection. Yeah. And Dark Side of the Moon from start to finish doesn't have the best songs they've ever written. They clearly don't have the best songs ever written.
But as a concept.
And not even just, right, as a concept, but also in the execution of it. Because there are plenty of great concept albums. I still am in awe of the fact that in the early 1970s, these guys were able to do, in an analog sense, what would be difficult even now for people digitally. The song Time, for example, right? The song Money, those two are the ones that stand out because you can't
even imagine what they had to do in the studio to make them sound.
And to get it on pitch in time, whether it's the clocks or the cash register, it's just...
And then when they performed them live, think of how mind-numbingly difficult that had to be as well.
I do wonder, though, for that. My guess is for that, there had to have been some sort of recording,
some tracking going on,
which
definitely.
is a big,
had to.
Yeah, it's a big debate now in terms of live music with rock bands and stuff, because so much music is recorded digitally. And when I say recorded, I don't mean played into a computer and recorded. I mean literally programmed.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when I recorded the theme song, when I wrote and recorded the theme song for this podcast, the only instrument that I actually played was the piano, but it was on the iPad. It wasn't even my piano. Like it was, I if I really wanted to, I could have just programmed in the notes, which it felt so inauthentic to me. And again, that's a separate time. If you ever come back to do another one of these, we can talk about the direction of AI and all that.
Robert Plant even joked about that about doing his first solo albums in the 80s, how the drum kit recordings started becoming prevalent in music, so that he didn't even need a drummer.
Right.
And he still had everyone else, but that was all.
And I can't, again, I know this is a tangent we're jumping off on, but again, I can't imagine.
As we are wont to do.
And hey, this is real life, folks. This is how it goes. At least we're not at McDonald's getting stared at by.
As I always say, stream of consciousness.
That's right. And so, in terms of drumming specifically, like I derive so much of my experience, and again, this is really more from higher energy rock stuff. I'm sure if I'm listening to whatever softer, a Billy Joel concert or whatever, or it doesn't matter as much. But
it's not about the drums,
right? When I'm there, like I just watching the physical, it's such a primal instrument to play. It's percussion, it's energy, it's all this.
Especially with some drummers that aren't here anymore, the way they used to play. Oh. To watch them go at them kits, yeah.
Not being a drummer myself,
right.
I don't gravitate as much towards them in terms of like the idealization, right? And so like obviously I like Keith Moon. Bonham's probably one of my favorites. I would say Stuart Copeland is probably, if I had to pick one favorite drummer from before the 90s, I would probably go with him because of the energy. He always felt like he was just on the edge of tipping over.
And not that I was a big fan of the Police, but you're in a three-piece, so you're really responsible for a lot of the sound. You have to be on pitch, and you're getting at it.
And Neil Peart, again, this is all better suited for a separate discussion about like prog rock, like Yes, and some of these other bands, the keyboardists, and and everything. But in terms of to focus back on Pink Floyd, right? One scary thing that you mentioned was him being a genius and then losing his mind. Right. And I've read a lot recently too about how I don't know what his diagnosis was offhand, but I would imagine it might have been schizophrenia. And there's a weird potential correlation between people who have used mind-altering drugs, so LSD, other not psychotics. What's
psychedelics?
Psychedelics. Yeah. There we go.
And that could have been a problem with him as well, because again, got to remember the time,
right?
And it was quite popular back then.
It's almost like a psychedelic. I don't want to say psychedelic-induced psychosis because I don't know enough about the terminology. But if you want to talk about schizophrenia or whatever it is, it seems like in some people that it was pre-existing mental illness. Think of it as just being dormant, right? And for some reason, something about those substances did. And I've always wondered that.
Yeah, that again, not knowing anything about the psychology of it. Yeah, that's very possible. It could have been something there all along, and the use of the drugs just.
The earlier albums, what was it? Ummagumma and Atomic Mother. Oh, I'm trying to think of what they were called.
Too many years.
Yeah.
But Ummagumma, I remember distinctly, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I associate that sound, not just necessarily the music, but just literally like the recorded sound with like Jefferson Airplane and some of these other bands from...
Jefferson Airplane, the very first concert I ever went to.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
At Wall Stadium.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Is there another hitchhiking story there?
No, there isn't, actually.
Okay.
But there is a good story to that. Now, you got to remember, it's Wall Stadium. They built the stage, and at one point during the show, Gracie Slick started like yelling at fans. She said, "Hey, you guys, get out from under the stage. Stop trying to look up my dress." And if anyone knows the Jefferson Airplane / Starship or Gracie Slick, you'll know that really wasn't too far out for her.
Right.
But and actually, you got me thinking about all these things. And going back to harmonies, maybe the most harmonic band that ever lived, but this is going back and back, and it wasn't even really rock and roll. It was folk rock. Crosby, Stills, Nash.
No young.
Not young.
Yeah.
Not young yet. But yeah, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. That was one of the first albums I ever bought.
He added the Canadian flavor, the maple syrup.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, look it up. Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. Listen to that song and tell me that them boys couldn't sing.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. See, I've always respected your musical acumen, and that's why I started off the way that I did with the crediting that I gave you, because you gravitate towards more complex and just richer material. You love Tedeschi Trucks, right?
Absolutely.
As another band.
I am going to see them in July again. In Connecticut this time.
With Chrissy or?
Well, with my daughter and her, intended and his parents. Roxanne didn't want to make the trip up to Connecticut. And they was one of the things I like a lot about Tedeschi Trucks is the fact that they're bringing back an era of music that is almost relegated to the pages of history. It's a 12-piece band or orchestra, if you will. I mean, they have trumpet players and.
Well, I think we've spoken a little bit about Zach Brown before. He spiritually reminds me a lot of them.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm biased towards him as a fellow Tennessee Squire, clearly. But in terms of their sound, right? Originally, same thing. They were, I believe, a 9-piece on stage, and they had this really great country rock kind of sound. Right. But their individual interests are so unbelievably varied. If you look at a set list or a set of set lists, the bands that they cover and throw in the middle are great.
Yeah, yes. Oh, Zach Brown. Yeah, we didn't talk about him much at all. And yeah, and I'm not a big country guy, but yeah, Zach Brown really does it.
But
because they do cover a lot of different music. Yeah.
The problem, though, and I'm not accusing him of selling out or anything, but if you look at the evolution, if you want to call it that, in their sound, they moved towards a muted, more radio-friendly vibe. I mean, I know they had a song with Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, "Heavy is the Head" or "Heavy is the Crown."
About as heavy as you could get.
Right, which is great. Yeah. But there's just some other stuff. I think they had like a dance song. And again, listen, it can absolutely work or not. And for me, at least, it doesn't work. One of my other guests, Brian Monzo, we were discussing music, and we were talking about one of the Foo Fighters albums where they went around. It was Sonic Highways. It was actually a documentary. And the pitch for it initially was, 8 cities or whatever it is where the cities influence the sound. So I was thrilled because I'm thinking like, oh, okay, listen, they're going to be in New Orleans. They're going to have a brass section. They're going to be here. It's going to be like a country song.
In Miami and the salsa.
Yeah. And I'm like, if there's ever a guy and a band that can pull this off, it's Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters.
Of course.
Well, music comes out. Turns out the music was written before anything even happened. And it was really just
all done in Portland.
Yeah, pretty much. And it was all just the lyrics that were supposedly influenced. And I remember being furious because I had set myself up with these expectations, and clearly, who's Dave Grohl not to meet my expectations?
How dare he?
But when it came out a couple months later, someone mentioned in an interview, they asked about, including local sounds, and he scoffed at the notion. He's like, oh, what? So we'd have, again, the things that I mentioned, and I guess it never crossed his mind, and I just thought that would have been a cool way
I think that would have actually been, should have been the way to go. I agree with you on that, because here we go, another segue. I have literally no ambition to ever travel outside of the United States because there's so much interesting stuff to see here. I mean, God, so much that you can see just without ever leaving, the 48. Leaving out Alaska and Hawaii, which might be the best. There's so much things I haven't seen in our country that I still want to do.
I've had this debate with several people, but one of my best friends at length several times. When we were in college, my wife and I embarked on a couple of different road trips.
Right.
Like
you told me you've been to all 50.
We've driven a 48 and almost drove the 49 of the 50. And people goofed on me.
You tried to drive to Hawaii?
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to lie. I did look into it. My brother was stationed there in 2007, and I wanted to know. This was more of the fear of flying because I had never taken a flight before. And I was I was jumping in. We were flying from Newark to SFO and the next day from SFO to Hawaii.
There you go.
Because So I had looked into, well, how much would it cost to, drive across the country and ship it over? Clearly it wasn't practical. But
I wouldn't think so.
My friend James Ferguson at the time, I mean, we're still friends now, and that's not his name at the time. See, again, senior moment. Back then, James and I were discussing this, and he was taking trips to Costa Rica, to the Caribbean, and all these places. And my focus was here, and I asked him, I was like, dude, there's so much to see within the coasts here. Why not explore that now? And he gave an interesting answer, which I hadn't factored in, but he said that that's more of like a family trip kind of thing, which at the time, even though it was just Heather and I, we were just dating, we were married for some of it. I get it, because he was going off, and not necessarily just, having ragers wherever he went, but like, yes. Are you more apt to go to Thailand, as a single guy in your 20s or with the kids,
No, somehow I don't see that happen.
Right.
And I do get it. I know why they call them flyover states, because there's really nothing worthwhile to see in a lot of them. But just the fact that they're here, I actually have been to St. Louis. I've seen the Arch, and, I've gone to Tennessee. I still haven't gone to a few states, but there's so many things that,
and the shame of it.
I'd like to see a tumbleweed.
So funny thing about the tumbleweeds, they are not as soft as you would think they are. When we hit, so they're essentially branches that have been rolled up. I'm thinking it's more like, like hay or something soft. Right. Hell no. And those things, they sounded like depth charges going off hitting a car. I don't know if you remember the little echo that we had. I thank God she made it through, because that was something else. Oh, the wind's there. Now for me, growing up, listen, my parents did the best that they could with what they had and what we had.
And that's what everybody, I believe everybody's parents tried their best. Mine failed objectively, but that's okay. No, I just, I try to do the best I could with my kids, who are both near your age, and, they seem well adjusted.
So what, 49, 51? Trying to.
They'll both get mad if you say, hear this.
No.
They're both in their 30s, so. Yeah.
Right. And for me, the vacations, and again, right, this is the big thing for me. We didn't have everything, clearly. We didn't have cable until I was in high school. I wasn't on a plane until I paid for it for my honeymoon, right? Never went to Disney World. And, again, none of that mattered, because I learned it was a great experience for me, because it made me content and learn to live within my means and be happy with what I've got. Yeah. And so the vacations that we did take were all road trips, and they were all, we made it up to every state in New England. We made it as far west as Pennsylvania and as far south as Virginia, maybe West Virginia. And so it just felt like almost like a tease, right? With everything else that was out there. And so that sparked this wanderlust in me almost, this desire to explore. And I always had that. I don't know how familiar you are with Brooklyn, but where I lived was down near where the Belt Parkway is. And
I know that part of Brooklyn.
my neighborhood was surrounded by water on three sides. There was basically one road in and one road out. One road out. Whoa, I'm turning into Elmer Fudd there. And so for me, Garrettson Beach had this, it was almost a triumvirate, right? It was part Brooklyn, New York, obviously, part New England because of the coastal setting, and then part Midwest, small town, which that's a whole separate episode for that. But there was...
The mind's a beautiful thing.
At the end of what we call the avenue, right? Yeah. So at the end of Garrettson Avenue, the main drag, if you will, I could see the bay that eventually leads out to the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm looking out at the water, and then I see the highway just across the water. And again, with a writer's mind and a creative heart, it did something in me. And to be honest, if I didn't have these experiences, I don't know that I would have been able to write the books that I wrote, because so much of the fiction came from nonfiction, from life. And what worries me where my kids are concerned, now I'm finally getting to the point after all this. Thank God you don't charge for the word here. But with my kids, I'm curious to see what their relationship is with travel, because if I'm not mistaken, I think all three of them now are over 30 states driven to, visited to, been to. They've been to Alaska, and the shame of it is I wanted to wait for them to be the right age before we did some of those trips, because I wanted them to be able to remember.
Absolutely,
yeah. And this is unsolicited advice to anyone out there who's got kids and younger kids especially. You have no control over what they remember, regardless of the age that they are. And that's okay, right? Because no, there are certain things that Tim and Sarah, if I bring up certain trips, that they'll reference. It could be this time we stopped at a rest stop and this crazy, funny thing in the bathroom. And I'm like, hey, we went to the St. Louis Arch and got to the top and saw to the other side of the country, but you remember the bathroom at the McDonald's in Iowa.
In Oshkosh. Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because that's their memory. It's their story. So
you're talking about stories like growing up, people probably, no, everybody should get this one. I used to be my parents' remote. We didn't have remotes to change channels. It was get up and put Michael. Channel 2 on, yeah. Or it was Willie, or it was Dennis. Whoever was handy, that's who had to change the channel. I bet. Then again, we only had 5 channels back then. You had 2, 4, 5, 7, and 11. That's it. There wasn't, 500 channels with nothing on. Thank you, Bruce. But yeah, it's all. And again, but much like you, we didn't take vacations. We went in the car. I'm one of 9. My parents, they couldn't afford to take us on vacations.
Wait, you were one of 9, and your parents had a TV?
Yeah. Irish American Catholics,
That was the running joke, right? Yeah. And and this is another thing.
Yeah, TV went off
right
at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, there you go. So I remember specifically. So we took the kids to Alaska in 2017, which again, whole episode to itself. And then in 2018, we did a cross country trip. So that was the first time that we took the kids
how old
out
is
there.
Tim?
And so in that instance, Tim was 7, Sarah was 4, and Jack was. Oh, no, I'm sorry. For the cross-country road trip, Tim was 8, Sarah was 5, Jackson was 3. Yeah. And, we had already done other lesser trips, distance-wise and whatnot. So
God bless you, went cross-country with a 3-year-old. Oh, he was probably the easiest of the bunch, though, because just go to sleep.
Yeah, pretty much.
But 5 and 7, that was, yeah, they were interesting ages. I remember that.
I'm glad that you say that, though, because I remember distinctly 3 different times, people coming up to me, knowing that we were going on the trip, asking if we were all ready for it and saying, I bet you got all the movies loaded up on the iPads. And I balked each time because I said, the window is the iPad. And they didn't really understand it. I'm like, no.
I get that, yeah. Because there's so much to see.
And it's also, again, I got 1 foot and maybe 1 toe on the soapbox now. Like,
don't you like this music show?
You got to get your face out of the screen and live life. And for people who have been around us with basketball, they're chuckling because I'm constantly recording, the games and stuff. So I'm technically watching it through the screen.
But you're not watching it. Yes.
But right. But in terms of the road trips, to me, the music was so important. And there's a soundtrack in my mind for every trip. And even my wife. My wife has become more of a music person since we got together. Yeah. But back in 2007, when we went on our honeymoon, the Foo Fighters released a 10-year anniversary edition of their album, The Color and the Shape. And that's the one that has Everlong and all my favorite songs from there. And so I bought it in Hawaii, mind you, at Best Buy. But we had that. We had the 51st Date soundtrack, which for the movie takes place in Hawaii. So that was intentional for us to bring that.
Such a good movie, too.
It was great.
I mean, I think they're so good together. Sandler and
Drew Barrymore.
Just old age. What can I tell you?
On-screen chemistry, right?
Yes, absolutely. It does show.
I'm telling you, I got to copyright that conversational chemistry phrase. I think it's a good one. And then
I absolutely, that I told you that. On the side. I really like that.
And then the Plain White T's had an album called Every Second Counts. And there was a song called Hey There, Delilah, which was, plastered everywhere. And so those 3 albums, we listened to, nonstop on loop for the entirety of that. I almost said road trip, the honeymoon. Yeah. And for me, it was the soundtrack of that moment, that honeymoon. I remember driving around the big island of Hawaii. We're driving up volcanoes. We're hiking across volcano fields. Right. We're doing all these things, and those are the songs that I connect with. And it's funny. I remember too. Everybody goofs on me that we make everything into a road trip, and we did. I mean, we covered the entire island, and we were there. And then on Oahu, it was the same thing, whether we were doing Diamond Head or whatever it happened to be. And I remember this one time we went down to Iolani Palace, which for anybody who doesn't know is the only royal structure in the United States.
That's right. That's your history lesson.
There it is. And we were visiting that and then the state capitol building, because we've done all 50 states and all 50 capitals.
Oh, wow.
And incongruently, like across the street in downtown Honolulu, which is, it's a metropolis. It's a small one.
Yeah.
There was a Starbucks. And so we got Starbucks. We had they are. We had our, our drinks, whatever we had. And then off we went to road trip through across the island. And we were going through like not a forested area, but I remember there being trees. But more than that, I remember seeing a man with a machete on the side of the road. And as one does when he sees a man with a machete, tells his wife to pull over.
No.
Mr. Machete also happened to have coconuts. And I said, well, I'm on Hawaii. Like, hell yeah, of course I'm going to get a coconut.
You're still a brave man. A man with a machete.
I trust
you
him.
Stop.
It was only like $3 for the coconut. So he, he lops the top off of this thing, and I'm slurping away, and it's great. I get back into the car, which was a rental, so sort of a salient point
who cares?
here. And this sucker is dripping all over the place. And so fortunately, I still had my now empty Starbucks cup, and into the cup, the coconut went. And that became, I took a picture of it. It became sort of like one of my iconic images from the honeymoon with this, coconut Starbucks combination.
It's a new coffee for you. Coconut coffee.
Yeah.
From Starbucks.
Right. And so, and again, the whole time that's happening, we're listening to those albums. And I guess to wrap things up, because I've kept you way longer than people here even realize. But I would like to put an end cap on it in this. And music is something that touches the soul. As lame as that might sound.
It might sound lame, but it is so true. I mean, it speaks to you, or it speaks to me. I think it speaks to most people. It makes life bearable sometimes.
It really does. It's catharsis. If you think about it, and maybe this is what it is. Music is emotion set to melody.
Okay.
You can be the happiest you've ever been and feel that in a song.
Right.
There are songs
the lowest you could ever be, and you can hear that in a song. Absolutely.
It just resonates in a way that nothing else does. And I appreciate our friendship more than you know. Definitely more than you know. But,
I think I got an idea, because I feel much the same. And
and music is
a big part.
A big part of it. The sports is the other part. Maybe that's a separate episode, but nobody wants to hear us cry about the Vikings and the Jets.
Well, no, the Jets have a good team now. Yeah. Hey, let's go. Super Bowl or bust.
Listen, as long as it's one of us, that's all. You guys have a little less suffering historically than we do, but...
I don't know about less suffering.
Well,
you might have lost 4 Super Bowls, but we haven't gotten there in 50 years.
I was going to... But I've shown you the picture of the T-shirts that have the Vikings Super Bowl trophy case on it with all the cobwebs and stuff, which, by the way, that's such a not nice Vikings piece of paraphernalia. The first time I ever saw that shirt was in the Mall of America, which is located in the state of Minnesota.
Yes.
At the, wait, you ready for this? The Green Bay Packers team store in the Mall of America.
In the Mall of Minnesota.
In the middle of Minnesota. It was awful. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming by. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, and my pleasure.
You're ever open to coming back again? Hopefully, everyone listening
we can finally listen, and we can finally talk about music.
This was so great. Thanks again to Crossing Guard Mike. Green
My
Mike,
pleasure.
Mr. Mike English for coming through. And thank you to everyone who's listening, wherever and whenever you are.